I have seen every single episode of game theory, film theory, food theory, and style theory. Every single one. From Sansa's Nest to Skibbity Toilet to Best Boobs in Gaming to that one video where Matt Pat uploaded a picture of his wife in a bikini. In the most recent episode of Film Theory, as I'm writing this at least, God knows it'll probably take more than a week to get this out, is by far the worst one that has ever been uploaded to any of these four channels. The offending video is called How YouTube Broke Your Brain. Side note, the capitalization is weird. I don't get it. I don't understand why it would make people want to click on the video more. Anyway, every single point made in the video is myopic and fails to take into account most of what's actually happening. If you haven't seen the video, I'll recap it as we go along so you don't need to go watch it. The thesis of the video is the ability to experience whatever we want on demand removes a lot of cultural touchstones for people to gather around, thereby creating more loneliness and, in turn, depression, as well as increasing the amount of political tension and making people question where they belong in the world.
When it comes right down to it, on-demand viewing of entertainment has slowly eroded away the very fabric of our collective cultural identity. And whether you realize it or not, that's a key reason why many of you watching right now are suffering from depression. That's why anxiety levels are on the rise. It's why America is a political hotbed and why so many people are questioning how they fit into the world right now.
As an aforementioned depressed, questioning, politically inclined person, I would hope to have more insight on my scenario than some white guy on the internet. I might sound like a white guy, I know, but I'm actually a very mentally ill white trans woman, so I can make that joke. While a lot more people are depressed in recent years, it's not because of on-demand video and a lack of cultural media, nor loneliness, and I hope to prove that point through this video and explain why it is actually happening. All my sources will be in the description, as always. I'm not going to argue against media being different for each individual, because that's almost definitely true, but I do want to point out his linchpin that supposedly proved this point to him.
You know what really proved this one to me? Skibbity Toilet. Seriously. True story, I was recently talking to a big room of Google's higher-ups and I asked them if they'd ever seen a Skibbity Toilet video. You know, that insanely popular series of viral shorts that's gotten over 35 million subscribers and 12 billion views on their platform in the last 5 months alone. Not a single person in the room had ever heard of it.
Apparently business people not watching content intended for younger audiences is surprising. I wonder if the same reaction would have been had to business people not watching Wow Wow Websy a couple decades ago. He goes on to restate his thesis that different people watching different things is somehow bad. One big point I want to bring up is that, yes, the stuff we get recommended is different, yet people are still watching the same things. I can easily prove this to you with a simple meme.
Fuck it, we ball becomes far more weighty once we account for the pre-existing axiom that is, ball is life. For the latter, effectively transforms the former into, fuck it, we live. And what maxim could be more gravely important than that which urges man to persist at all costs?
There are so many levels to this meme that all had to come together into this beautiful amalgamation. Of course, there's the fuck it we ball meme as well as the ball is life axiom, the former coming from internet subcultures and the latter, as far as I can tell, coming from a single guy saying something about a basketball team, both of which serve my point nicely. Ball is life is easier to explain, I think, so I'll start there. According to dictionary.com, who doesn't cite their source, a precursor to the phrase was said in 1996 by Rob Ball on a message board, where he said, "B-ball is life." The exact origin of the phrase isn't really important, but for the sake of brevity, let's just assume that dictionary.com is entirely correct in their assertion that this is the veritable origin of the phrase. How did this phrase get passed around? How did it become such a well-known phrase? Communication. That's the entire thing the film theory video fails to take into account. We aren't watching the same things because of algorithmic recommendations or because some board executives thought it would get them more money. We're watching the same things because we're communicating, because we're sharing things with each other. Fuck it, we ball is arguably a better example just because its origin is a lot more attributable to the internet. We ball as a phrase was used throughout the 2010s, primarily by black communities and icons. The specific phrase, fuck it, we ball, was popularized by Young Thug, a black rapper, in a tweet, and that pushed it into the cultural zeitgeist because of individuals using that phrase, not just because of one guy said it. It eventually even made it into broader cultures, even being assigned to a fictional white trans girl. I just want to take a second to point out that my source for that claim was knowyourmeme.com. That might seem strange, but Know Your Meme cited its sources much better than the dictionary.com article explaining the origin of ball is life. Again, the exact origin isn't super important, but my point is that communication makes things popular now, but this was too funny to not point out. Outside of those two phrases, there are still a few layers to this meme that I want to go over. The banana suit itself comes from Little Big Planet, a video game series, but specifically the PSP game. Putting animal faces over Sackboys, the character actually wearing the suit, started with cats and was largely popularized by the crying banana cat memes, which is a rabbit hole we really don't need to go down right now. I have no idea where the specific image used in the video came from, but I think you get my point by now. For one final layer to this whole thing, the song that is in the background is from a video game, Undertale, which itself was a huge cultural thing across most of the internet. something that even game theory touched on several times. See the previously cited Sans' Nest video for an example. Memes alone are filled with layers and layers of in-jokes and culture and form given to them by the people who share them and the context in which they are shared. Culture still exists, and its hand is still heavy, though the ones who move it are much smaller and more numerous. Just because you can't see the culture doesn't mean you can't make it and shape it yourself. Now that we've gotten the accusations that culture doesn't exist anymore out of the way, the rest of the video awaits, from the poor evidence cited to strengthen the thesis to the actual underlying causes. So let's get into the meat of the video. Starting off, he states that Breaking Bad's finale, one of the biggest TV shows as of recent, got over 10 million views, which sounds like a lot, but Seinfeld got over 70 million, and this discrepancy is because of streaming. The problem is, he's only counting the views within the first 24 hours. Streaming allows us to watch content when we want to watch it, so of course fewer people are watching in the first 24 hours. People just watched it later. That's not even the whole story though. I've never seen a single episode of Breaking Bad, yet I still laugh at the memes and join in on the references. How can that possibly be? Have you been listening to me at all? Communication is the key that MatPat has been missing this whole time. I can see a meme, ask what it means, get an explanation, and understand why it's funny. I can hear "Why are you blue?" out of context and still think it's hilarious. I can see a meme of Jessie telling Walter she thinks she might be trans and enjoy the subtleties that I get from outside context. You don't need to watch something at the exact same moment as someone else to understand the same references and context. I'm trying to be careful with my language here since I don't think MatPat wrote this video. It's highly unlikely that he did. But he is the face of the channel, and personifying my objections makes the point harder. When I say MatPat missed the point, it's not because it's literally MatPat himself making the mistake. I feel like that nuance is important to point out. Anyway, moving on, he goes heavy into the idea that we seem to need some sort of phrase that we can repeat to each other. But where is this coming from? Why do I need to walk up to someone and have them understand me when I start meowing at them to form a bond? Meowing at people is a meme in certain subcultures that I'm a part of, absolutely, but they don't need to be in that same sphere for me to form a connection. We might have something else in common, or I could introduce them into something that they haven't thought on before. Communication is the missing link. With that supposed evidence, he cites that lack of pop culture as the cause, or at least one of the causes, of the spike in loneliness, despite the fact that loneliness has been studied heavily since at least the 1980s, on top of the fact that, while loneliness is increasing under certain definitions, it's been a linear increase since the 70s, which clearly has nothing to do with streaming. The exact ways the studies I cite measure loneliness muddles the data a bit, especially since you have to pay to access the full articles. But as far as I can tell from the abstract bits, the feeling of loneliness, subjective loneliness, went down between the 80s and the 2010s, but the actual fracturing of groups and subcultures increased in the same time, all the way up to 2021, which is the most recent study I cited. One thing I specifically want to bring up is the statement that the amount of people we can form a bond with becomes smaller because there are fewer people in each individual community.
It supplies us with connection. One of the easiest ways to connect with someone that you don't know is to find a piece of IP that you both know something about. Wait a minute, you also watched the finale of Seinfeld? Well, hello! Oh, you saw Infinity War? Why didn't they just go for the head? You listen to Taylor Swift too? That's awesome. What era is your favorite? But as pop culture becomes more individualized, the group we feel that we can truly connect with becomes smaller and smaller.
There's so many things wrong with this statement, and it's hard to even know where to begin. First of all, no one is only part of one community. That's absurd. I personally know people who play the popular games that some despise, from Call of Duty to FIFA, who also play more niche titles like the Souls games or indie titles like It Takes Two and Undertale. Niche is a relative term here, but my point stands. You could be part of multiple communities. The more fractured your interests are, the more likely you are to find people you can connect to. In the past, if you happen to not like Seinfeld, that's too bad. But you don't need to like Call of Duty to enjoy Trackmania, and the chance that someone does like something you do increases. More people are included in the many cultures that we have, rather than so many being excluded by the cultures that used to be the mainstream. On top of that, even if you're only part of a single community, which doesn't happen, Dunbar's number comes into play. If you don't know, Dunbar's number is essentially how many people it's even possible to hold a stable relationship with. While the exact number is under question, the principle remains. With only so much time and brain power, you can only have so many friends. They are the most important part of your social structure, and they are the ones that you share things with and talk to the most. Essentially, the idea that small communities are bad is entirely wrong and myopic at best.
A Gallup poll from 1980 showed that 20% of the population felt lonely. That same poll in 2020 reported that 36% of people, more than 1 in 3, was grappling with some form of serious loneliness. That was 2020, right? That was the pandemic. You think that coming back from the pandemic would have improved the situation. But polls in 2023, 2 years after lockdowns have ended in most places, they show that loneliness continues to climb, with some studies reporting 60% of respondents feeling isolated, lonely, or struggling to make personal connections.
This clip shows what is probably the worst thing about the video. First of all, that Gallup poll. The numbers I'm seeing in 2020 are only high as 25%. I don't know where they're getting the 36% number, but let's assume that it was early 2020 or 2019 and they read the graph wrong. Fine. Immediately after saying that, they say that the statistic climbed to a staggering 60% in 2023. But Gallup, the source that they cited for the 36% number, I'll remind you, says that it dropped to 17% in 2023. I genuinely have no idea where the 60% came from. I've searched pages of Google Scholar for a single analysis, one study, even a survey that says 60%, but I genuinely can't find anything with a number even close to that. I've gone through article after article that says some studies with that number exist, but not a single one of them cites its sources, just like how film theory doesn't. Wait a second though, let's listen to that again.
Showed that 20% of the population felt lonely. That same poll in 2020 reported that 36% of people, more than 1 in 3, was grappling with some form of serious loneliness. Some studies reporting 60% of respondents feeling isolated, lonely, or struggling to make personal connections.
That language is very vague. Why go from serious loneliness to isolated? Well, another article I found says that around 50% feel lonely at least occasionally. The article doesn't cite its sources, but I'd wager that whatever survey that 60% number is coming from says something similar. It's likely a miscommunication that 60% of people are lonely sometimes, being misconstrued into the same scope as the serious loneliness figure. It's also worth mentioning that MatPat says it's an epidemic despite actual meta-analyses saying that the term epidemic is an overstatement, but I digress. I really want to give the theorists a benefit of the doubt. Maybe they misread the graphs. Maybe their sources are really good and the public ones are somehow worse. Maybe that 60% number was miscommunicated and it isn't their fault. So what? Even if they put their best foot forward in making this video, they still spread a ton of misinformation with this one video. I won't be here to criticize every single video they make. I can't spend 12 hours a week on every single video they make to fact check their videos like this. No one else will be either. Inevitably mistakes will slip under the radar, and I can't trust them as a science communicator anymore. Honestly, a lot of what they've been making recently hasn't been resonating with me in the same way that it used to, so I'm glad to have a reason to cut them off outside of just boredom, but this is definitely the end of an era for me. We're not done though, because there's definitely more to talk about with this video. With all the points in this video so far being complete garbage, what are the actual reasons that depression is on the rise? Why does it feel like people are struggling more now than ever? A lot of science channels do everything they can to remain centrists, not lean to either side politically. Vsauce 3 is guilty of this in recent memory with a lot of the videos about cops. Now, film theory is too. The problem with this stance is science is extremely one-sided. One side is backed up with facts, statistics, and reality, while the other is backed up entirely by dogma, tradition, and preference. I won't state which side is which for now, that's up for you to find out, but my point is this. The problem falls under politics. Yes, it's also sociology, but sociology deals with people, and people are political. It's also economical, that's a big one, but again, economy is policy. Enough with the illusions. I plan on explaining this as much as I can to the best of my ability, but if you're scared of facts and logic, you might want to tune out now. It's undeniable that depression rates, as well as other mental illnesses such as anxiety, CPTSD, and even autism, are increasing. What does that even mean in this context? Why is this happening if not for loneliness? Before moving on, I want to emphasize how complex this all is. Psychiatry, sociology, statistics, economy, it's all extremely complex, and there's a reason that there are entire fields dedicated to fractions of these topics, and there's no way I could ever accurately represent what all of this data means, and there's no way you could understand it either. So instead of giving you raw numbers and running with it, I will do my absolute best to find meta-studies and articles and analyses written by experts in these fields. I'm here to share information, not create it and not define it. The biggest correlation to mental illness is economic standing. Not just economic standing itself, but economic inequality. Components and Correlates of Mental Well-Being by Morton Bazar cites negative effect, positive sense of involvement, and long-term satisfaction as the three main correlates to mental health, which are affected by social participation, cultivation of hobbies, planfulness, emotional reactivity, and physical health. I hope it's obvious why these are affected by economical standing, but just to clear up any that you might not understand. Social participation is a big one. It's why loneliness is such a bad thing, but it goes deeper than that. It's not just having friends, just talking to people. It's finding new people, talking to new people, finding new interests, helping your community in a positive way. There are a few ways this ties into economy, the biggest of which being that third places you go that aren't home or work, are increasingly becoming too expensive. I'll get to the state of the overall economy later, but for now, it's obvious to see that if you don't have enough money already, you won't be able to spend extra money going to a bar, arcade, cafe, whatever, and places like parks, free open spaces for people to just exist, have also been getting worse over time. The average amount of money spent on parks in the US is lower than the amount spent in 2007. Cultivation of hobbies is also pretty obvious. Almost all hobbies cost money. Planfulness has to do with the amount of time you have to do things, as well as having stability in the first place. If you're barely making it through the month, you can't really plan on what you're going to do. You don't know if you're going to have enough money to do anything, or if you'll even have your job, or if you'll get injured, or if you'll be able to eat. Emotional reactivity does make it harder to keep a job, and it can be worsened by not having enough money for treatment, such as medication or therapy. Physical health is also pretty obvious, as already been touched on. If you get sick, you might not have enough money to go see a doctor, you might not have the money for treatment. All this ties into inequality because the economy itself is heavily influenced by how far on top the ones on top actually are. 2023 saw record profits for corporations, and yet record inflation continues to squeeze consumers. Both of those statements are in the same article, and it's hard to see how someone would claim that this isn't a political statement. We're not done with the film theory video yet, though, because the economy is only the start of the political discourse Matt Pett carefully skates around. Most telling is saying religiosity decreasing is somehow a bad thing. Yes, it gives one less avenue to connect with people, one less community, but again, there are more places to get that connection. What good does religion cause? A place to be, community, and that's pretty much it. You can argue that most fundraising and charity in certain places comes from religion, but that's only because so many people are religious in the first place. If there are fewer religious communities than secular communities, the majority would be from secular sources. Now, what bad comes from religion? I'm going to primarily cite Christianity, since that's the biggest religion in the US, but this also applies to a lot of, say, Islam. The biggest problems Christianity causes are political. This is where most of the facts and logic come in, so if you're not very smart, you might want to cover your ears. Most of the right are religious, and most of the problems are from the right. I'm not going to claim that Democrats are good, especially recently, but the Democrats aren't even leftists, so that's kind of a moot point. Either way, conservative is on the right side of the political compass, and conservatism is objectively bad. First of all, the happiest countries in the world, Finland, Denmark, Switzerland, Iceland, all happen to be the most progressive countries in the world. If that's not a good thing, I don't know what is. On the flip side, it's really hard to get accurate readings of low happiness for several reasons, such as corruption, but we can still see well enough how conservatism leads to relative unhappiness. Afghanistan is the least happy country in the world, and one of the biggest contributing factors is the Taliban. Of course, the Taliban is Islamic, but not all Muslims support the Taliban, not even close. But the Taliban does still heavily support extremely conservative views. Women being subjugated to men, for example. India is the least happy country in South Asia and is one of the most conservative countries in the world. Mali, Iran, Pakistan, all incredibly conservative countries and all incredibly low on the happiness ranking. The video goes on to say that patriotism has plummeted in the last decade, especially for younger people, and this is indeed because of how well-informed young people are. We don't get our news from big media corporations anymore. Instead, I can see videos of the country that my politicians are funding the bombing of getting bombs dropped in the middle of innocent neighborhoods. I can see how many people are being bullied into discarding their identities. I can see how many people are really living in poverty despite the myth of the American dream. In the same way, he cites jobs being different, more remote for example, as decreasing opportunities to meet people, but the simple fact that loneliness isn't higher than ever should dissuade you from believing that this is somehow a bad thing, on top of the fact that he says striking somehow prevents you from meeting and joining with people, despite needing to be well informed and likely in a union to even strike in the first place. The idea that there can be extreme views on gender or race is absurd. Science shows time and again exactly what gender and race are. The only way you can have an extreme view on them is by ignoring science. This doesn't build up walls between normal people, it builds up walls between the average person who has empathy and intelligence and the idiots who think that sex and gender are somehow the same thing despite being proven wrong again and again. The people who think your race somehow determines how you'll behave are stupid, and they're being ostracized for more inclusive and healthy communities. We should not be working together with bigots, we should be ostracizing them because the only way you can believe something that wrong is by being intentionally ignorant. The idea that we need to be accepting of bigots allows the bigots to build up walls in the first place. They are the problem, not those who want to push them out. That's what dogma causes. This is worsened by religion and conservatism. The entire point of all the progress we've made in these areas is our similarities. Males and females aren't different in any meaningful way, at least not socially. Same with white, black, and brown people. We're all the same. We don't tout how different we are from the bigots. We tell the bigots they're stupid and move on. It's not that we can't connect with the other side of the aisle. It's that we refuse to compromise on topics that significantly affect our and others' lives. So where does that leave us? What does this all mean? Well, there's a lot. First of all, the entire thesis of the film theory video is wrong, but it's not entirely unsubstantiated. A lot of people do feel lonely, at least sometimes, and 17% is still millions of people. A disproportionate amount of those people are likely drawn to channels like this, somewhere that will tell their stories, somewhere they can feel connected. It's okay to seek connection, it's good, and if you need help, those resources exist. Find communities around your favorite games, shows, books, foods, whatever. They're out there. The problem comes when the problem is exaggerated and made to be worse than it really is. Disinformation and misinformation are terrible things, especially when they're propagated by sources that will get millions of views. On top of that, remember that science is inherently one-sided, and if someone says something about being kind to bigots, disregard them. They don't know what they're talking about. It's disappointing to see what I used to consider a respectable science communicator fall so far and so fast, but so happens to all. I just hope not too many listen to this inane dribble, and I'm going to do my part as far as that goes. I forgot to mention completely in the section about mental illness being on the rise. Like, autism obviously isn't caused by socioeconomic issues, right? A lot of increasing mental illness, including depression, but especially like autism and ADHD, is because we're so much better at diagnosing as well. I just completely forgot to put that in the script, but the better we become at diagnosing, the more those statistics will seem to grow, even though those people were autistic or had ADHD already anyway. It's the same thing that happens to like left-handed people. Like, the amount of left-handed people seemed to grow really, really quickly, but then it leveled off because people were already left-handed. They were just less likely to be outwardly left-handed to show that they are left-handed. And that it's the same thing for like LGBT people, right? Where being left-handed, being gay, or knowing that you are autistic was extremely uncommon, and now that it's becoming more normal and also easier to be diagnosed, more people will learn or figure out that they are, I don't like saying not normal, but I mean, you know what I mean, right? They're not part of the mainstream communities. They're part of these, they're autistic, or they're gay or queer in some way. I use gay as shorthand for queer. Or, left-handed. And I forgot to add that to that section, and by this time I've already recorded the rest of this. Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Again, I have all my sources cited in the description, because not citing sources is evil and stupid, and you should not trust any science communicator who doesn't cite their sources. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I love you all, and I don't know how to end this.